The courtroom was quiet, but I could feel the judgment before the judge even spoke. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was the heavy, breathless kind that presses down, stealing the air from your lungs. Sunlight, sliced into sharp angles by the tall, grimy windows, did little to warm the polished mahogany in the stern faces. My hands, clasped tight in my lap to stop their trembling, were damp. I focused on the swirling grain of the wood on the table before me, counting the rings, trying to anchor myself to something solid, something real in this arena of carefully constructed narratives. Across the aisle, my ex-wife, Clara, sat straight back beside Mr. Henderson, her lawyer. His suit was impeccable Seville row, his silver hair glinting with an air of unshakable authority. Clara's expression was a carefully constructed mask of sorrowful concern, the kind she perfected over years, the kind that made her accusations seem less like calculated attacks and more like reluctant, painful truths. Sharper than ever, she called them in her last testimony, her voice, usually soft and melodious, taking on a steely, righteous edge as she painted me as unstable, unreliable, a fleeting, almost irresponsible presence in our daughter's life. Lies, all of them, yet woven with just enough slivers of misconstrued truth to make them terrifyingly, damningly believable. I sat alone at my table, a small, isolated island in a vast sea of adversarial procedure. My own lawyer, Ms. Albright, a young, earnest woman from legal aid, had done her best, her impassioned arguments heartfelt, but her valiant efforts felt like a paper boat launched against a steel-hulled warship. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the oppressive silence, a rhythm of rising despair. I knew, with a cold, sinking certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I couldn't match their formidable resources, their practiced rhetoric, her polished, persuasive deceptions. I risked a surreptitious glance at Judge Davies. Her face, framed by neatly coiffed gray hair, was impassive, her gaze fixed on the thick sheaf of papers spread before her. She'd heard it all now, Clara's meticulously crafted narrative of my supposed failings, Mr. Henderson's articulate, damning summations, Ms. Albright's increasingly desperate, though no less articulate, rebuttals, and my own halting, earnest words that had felt so hopelessly inadequate, so easily dismissed. What could I truly say against the relentless tide of doubt Clara had so skillfully, so patiently, created? Then, a small, almost imperceptible movement in the periphery caught my eye. Lily. My Lily. She sat in the front row of the public gallery, just behind me, a tiny, extraordinarily still figure. My heart ached with a fierce, protective love just looking at her. She was only 8 years old, far, far too young to be a silent witness to this sterile, adult battlefield where her future, her happiness, was being dissected and debated. She wore the little blue dress with the crisp white collar I'd bought her for her school concert last spring, the one she said made her feel like a proper singer. Her dark, glossy hair was pulled back into 2 neat braids, just as I'd painstakingly plaited it this morning, my clumsy fingers surprisingly gentle, the way her mother used to do, a small, unconscious echo of happier times. She clutched a small, worn-looking teddy bear, Patches, her steadfast, beloved companion since she was a toddler, its faded fur and button eyes seeming to absorb the suffocating tension in the room. Her small hands were white-knuckled around its plush, familiar body. Throughout these agonizing weeks, through every grueling hearing, she had been this way, utterly silent, preternaturally observant, her dark, intelligent eyes missing nothing. I tried to shield her, to explain things in gentle, age-appropriate terms. But how do you adequately explain to a child that the 2 people she loves most in the world are engaged in a bitter struggle over her? I thought I had already lost. The sheer weight of Clara's accusations, Mr. Henderson's confident, almost dismissive posture, the judge's unreadable, stern expression, it all pointed to a foregone, devastating conclusion. A cold, creeping dread seeped into my bones, chilling me from the inside out. Then, just as Judge Davies cleared her throat, presumably to begin her summary and deliver her verdict, Lily did something that made my breath catch, my heart stop. She slipped quietly off her chair. Her small, polished patent leather shoes made no discernible sound on the thick, worn carpet of the aisle. She walked, not towards me, as my heart yearned for her to do, but directly, with a strange, somber purpose, towards the judge's imposing, elevated bench. Patches was still clutched tightly in one hand. The other held a folded piece of paper. It looked like a child's drawing, or perhaps a letter, folded into a neat, small, precious square. My heart leaped into my throat, a wild, panicked bird. No one had told her to do this. I certainly hadn't. Ms. Albright looked as utterly stunned as I felt, her mouth slightly agape. Mr. Henderson frowned, a slight, almost imperceptible shift in his perfectly composed demeanor, a flicker of irritation in his eyes. Clara's head whipped around, her eyes wide, a flash of something unreadable, annoyance, startled surprise, fear. Crossing her face before the carefully constructed mask of maternal concern slipped hastily back into place. Lily, my quiet, intensely observant Lily, who had sat so silently through every painful hearing in her little blue dress and neatly plaited braids, her small, serious face a study in solemnity, stepped forward and, with a shy but undeniably determined air, held the paper up towards the uniformed bailiff, who, after a moment's hesitation and a quick, questioning glance at the judge, took it and passed it up. What happened next didn't just shift the verdict, it exposed a truth I hadn't dared hope, in my darkest moments, would ever be heard. Judge Davies unfolded the paper. Her expression, usually so sternly, professionally neutral, softened almost imperceptibly as she began to read. The courtroom, already quiet, held its collective breath. I could hear the frantic, desperate thumping of my own heart, loud as a drum in the sudden, profound silence. What had Lily written? What could an 8-year-old possibly say that would cut through the dense layers of legal argument, adult complexities, and carefully constructed falsehoods? My mind raced, a chaotic jumble of overwhelming fear and a fragile, nascent, almost unbearable hope. Clara's lawyer, Mr. Henderson, began to rise, his mouth opening, presumably to object to this unorthodox turn of events. But Judge Davies held up a hand, a silent, unequivocal command that brooked no argument. He settled back into his chair, a muscle twitching visibly in his jaw. Clara stared, transfixed, first at Lily, then at the judge, her painstakingly maintained composure finally showing visible cracks. My gaze drifted back to my daughter. Lily stood small and straight before the massive bench, her eyes fixed on the judge, not with defiance, but with a quiet, unwavering expectation. And in that moment, a memory washed over me, unbidden, sharp, and poignant. It was from a few months ago, one of those bleak, hollow Saturday mornings shortly after Clara had moved out, taking Lily, and most of the light, with her, leaving our small apartment echoing with an unbearable, suffocating emptiness. It was my weekend with Lily. We were at the little park down the street, the one with the squeaky swings and the slightly wobbly climbing frame. Lily had been unusually quiet, tracing abstract patterns in the sandbox with a broken twig. "What's wrong, sweet pea?" I'd asked, crouching beside her, my heart aching at her subdued mood. Her lower lip trembled. "Mommy says, she says you don't know how to look after me properly. That you forget things. That you're messy." The words were a punch to the gut, a bitter foretaste of the battle that was to come. Clara had already started her insidious campaign, subtly poisoning Lily's mind, or at least attempting to. I pulled Lily onto my lap, her small, warm body a comforting weight against mine. Sometimes daddies, and mommies too, get sad or worried, and it makes it hard to remember everything perfectly all the time, I'd said, choosing my words with excruciating care. "But I will never forget how much I love you, Lily. Never, ever. And I will always, always try my very best to be the best daddy I can possibly be for you. That's a promise." She looked up at me then, her dark, serious eyes searching mine for any hint of falsehood. "Pinky promise?" she'd whispered. "Pinky promise," I'd confirmed, linking my little finger with hers, the childish gesture sealing a sacred vow. That memory, so vivid, so painful in its implications, now felt like a fragile lifeline. Had she remembered that promise? Did she believe it? The judge continued to read, her expression unreadable once more. I remembered another time, a wild, stormy night. Lily had woken up screaming, terrified by a particularly violent clap of thunder that had shaken the windows. Clara had been out, a crucial work dinner, she'd said, though later, in the harsh light of our unraveling marriage, I'd wondered. I'd rushed into Lily's room, scooped her trembling form up, and held her close, rocking her gently, humming her favorite lullaby, the one my own mother used to sing to me, a melody of pure, unconditional love. The power had flickered out moments later, plunging us into an inky, unnerving darkness, but I kept humming, stroking her hair, until her violent shivers subsided and her breathing began to even out. "I'm here, Lilybuck," I'd whispered into her soft hair. "I'll always keep you safe. Nothing can hurt you when I'm here." She'd snuggled closer, a small, trusting sigh escaping her lips as she drifted back to sleep in my arms. Those were the moments, the sacred, private moments, that Clara was trying to erase, to paint over with her damning narrative of my supposed inadequacy. Clara's testimony from the previous week echoed with chilling clarity in my mind. She'd sat there, in the witness box, looking directly at Judge Davies, tears welling in her beautiful eyes, crocodile tears, I knew, but so utterly, devastatingly convincing to an outside observer. "He means well, Your Honor," she'd said, her voice trembling with perfectly feigned emotion, "but he's just not equipped. He's forgetful, disorganized. Lily needs stability, a structured environment, the kind I can provide. My home provides that. Well, it's often chaotic. He once forgot to pick her up from ballet." A sliver of truth twisted into a damning indictment. I had been late for ballet pickup once, by 10 agonizing minutes, caught in an unexpected gridlock after a crucial freelance work meeting ran much later than anticipated, a meeting I had to attend because Clara's increasingly lavish lifestyle, which she somehow maintained even after our separation, meant I was constantly scrambling to make ends meet. To cover my share of expenses she seemed to inflate at will. I'd called the ballet school, frantic, apologizing profusely. Lily had been fine, happily drawing with the kindly instructor. But in Clara's carefully edited telling, it became a potent symbol of my alleged chronic neglect. Mr. Henderson had then presented his evidence, a series of photographs of my small, two-bedroom apartment. Taken, I suspected, on a day Clara had come to pick up Lily and I hadn't yet returned from a grocery run. My writing desk, admittedly cluttered with research papers for a freelance project I was desperate to finish on time, a pile of Lily's vibrant artwork I hadn't yet found the perfect place to display, a pair of my old trainers kicked off by the sofa. An environment scarcely conducive to a child's structured upbringing, Your Honor, he'd intoned with grave, theatrical solemnity. My apartment wasn't a sterile show home. It was lived in, loved in. It was a place where Lily and I built magnificent forts out of blankets and sofa cushions, where we baked gloriously lopsided cakes, where her infectious laughter filled the small, cozy rooms. But seen through their critical, distorting lens, it became irrefutable proof of my fundamental failure as a parent. I'd felt the ground crumbling beneath my feet then. How could I possibly fight against such skillfully constructed, emotionally manipulative misrepresentations? Ms. Albright had cross-examined Clara rigorously, pointing out the glaring lack of context, the malicious framing, but the damage, I feared, had been irrevocably done. Each of Clara's carefully aimed accusations was like another heavy stone added to an already towering wall between me and Lily, a wall I felt utterly powerless to dismantle. I remembered Lily during those intensely stressful hearings. She'd sit so very still, patches clutched tight against her small chest. Sometimes, her troubled gaze would flit anxiously between Clara and me, a tiny, worried frown creasing her smooth forehead. During one particularly tense recess, she'd slipped her small, cold hand into mine, her fingers gripping mine with surprising strength. "Daddy," she'd whispered, her voice barely audible above the courtroom corridor hum. "Is it true? All those things Mommy says. Are you not good at looking after me?" The question, so innocent, so terrifyingly direct, had shattered what little composure I had left. I'd knelt down, right there on the sterile, polished linoleum of the corridor, and looked directly into her troubled, searching eyes. "Oh, Lily," I'd said, my voice thick with emotion I was struggling desperately to control. "What matters most, more than anything in this whole wide world, is that I love you more than words can say. And I try my very, very hardest, every single day, to be the best daddy I can possibly be for you. Do you feel safe with me? Do you feel loved when you're with me?" She'd nodded slowly, her dark eyes still earnestly searching mine. "Yes," she'd whispered. "But Mommy sounds so sure of herself." "Grown-ups sometimes see things very differently, sweet pea," I'd said, hating the painful inadequacy of my words, the complexity I couldn't simplify for her. "The most important thing, the only thing that really matters, is what you feel in your heart." I hadn't known then, couldn't have possibly guessed, that she would take those words to heart so profoundly, so literally. I hadn't known that she was already forming her own silent, courageous defense, not for me, perhaps, but for the simple, unvarnished truth of our life together. The silence in the courtroom stretched, taut and thin as a drawn bowstring. Judge Davies read the paper a second time, her brow furrowed in concentration, then a third. Her gaze eventually lifted from the page and settled on Lily, who still stood patiently, a small, unwavering beacon of courage, by the bench. Then, the judge looked at me, a long, searching, penetrating look. And for the very first time in all these wretched proceedings, I didn't see judgment in her eyes. I saw something else. Consideration. Perhaps even a dawning, reluctant understanding. That look from Judge Davies, so unexpectedly devoid of the sternness I'd come to anticipate, sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. It wasn't reassurance, not yet, but it felt like a tiny crack appearing in the formidable wall of certainty I'd felt surrounding Clara's meticulously constructed narrative. My eyes went back to Lily. Her small shoulders, squared with a quiet determination that utterly belied her tender age. When had she become so fiercely resolute? I thought back to the fraught days leading up to this final, decisive hearing. The strain on all of us had been immense, palpable. Clara, perhaps sensing victory was within her grasp, had become more brazen, more audacious in her tactics, subtly turning some of Lily's school friends' parents against me, artfully suggesting I was going through a very difficult time and might not be coping well. Insidious whispers followed me at school drop-offs on my designated days, pitying glances I knew Clara had skillfully orchestrated. Lily, with her uncanny, almost preternatural ability to absorb the emotional temperature of any room, any situation, must have felt it all, every nuance, every unspoken criticism. There was an evening, about a week ago. It was my turn to have Lily. We were deeply engrossed in her science project, a model of the solar system. She adored anything to do with space. We'd spent happy, messy hours cutting out cardboard planets, painting them with vibrant acrylics, carefully attaching them with lengths of string to a repurposed wire coat hanger. It was chaotic, joyful, collaborative. The kitchen table, our command center, was covered in newspaper, and we both had paint smudges on our noses and fingers. Lily was chattering excitedly about Jupiter's Galilean moons when she suddenly fell silent, her bright expression clouding over. "What is it, stargazer?" I asked gently, dabbing a smear of ultramarine blue paint from her cheek with my thumb. She looked down at the rather lopsided Saturn we just finished painting. "Mommy says her new house has a special room just for homework. A study. She said it's very quiet and grown-up, and I'll be able to concentrate much better there than here." Her voice was small, uncertain. My heart constricted painfully. Our little kitchen table, the bustling hub of our shared life, the scene of countless pancake breakfasts, imaginative drawings, challenging homework sessions, and heartfelt, whispered talks, was being casually dismissed as inadequate, substandard. "Well," I said, trying to keep my voice light, breezy, "this old table has seen a lot of amazing homework get done, hasn't it? And some pretty spectacular planet-making, if I do say so myself. Do you find it hard to concentrate here with me?" She looked up then, her eyes wide and startlingly serious. "No, Daddy. I like doing my homework with you. You always explain things so I understand them properly. And you don't mind if I make a mess or ask too many questions." She bit her lip, a habit she had when she was pondering something important. "Mommy gets a bit stressed if things aren't perfect all the time." A small, almost hesitant confession, but it spoke volumes. Clara's relentless pursuit of perfection, her deep-seated need for absolute control, often overshadowed Lily's equally important need for gentle guidance, patient encouragement, and the simple, uninhibited freedom to be a child. I recalled another instance, even more telling, after one of the particularly grueling early hearings. Clara had been especially scathing that day, Henderson particularly smooth and patronizing. I'd felt utterly beaten down, emotionally and physically exhausted. Lily had been waiting with a court-appointed childminder in a sterile little room down the hall. When I collected her, she took one look at my drained face, and her own small features crumpled in sympathy. She didn't say anything, just reached for my hand and squeezed it tight, her small fingers a surprising, vital anchor in the storm of my emotions. We walked to the car in a heavy, loaded silence. As I buckled her carefully into her car seat, she finally spoke, her voice a tiny, fragile whisper. "Is Mommy going to win, Daddy?" The question, so direct, so innocent, so full of a child's fear, was like a raw, open wound. I paused, leaning heavily against the car door, the cacophony of city noise fading into a dull, distant roar. "I don't know, sweet pea," I admitted, the brutal honesty costing me dearly. "I really, truly don't know. But I'm fighting as hard as I possibly can, with everything I have, because being your dad is the most important thing in the entire world to me." She had simply nodded, her gaze distant, thoughtful, as if processing complex information far beyond her years. Perhaps that was the precise moment when the seed of her idea, her brave, desperate letter, had been planted. She had seen my pain, my palpable fear, and her mother's relentless, polished, unyielding confidence. She had heard the accusations, the subtle but poisonous distortions, and, in her own quiet, profound way, had decided that her voice, her truth, needed to be heard too. The image of her at her little second-hand desk in her room at my apartment flashed vividly into my mind. I'd found it at a charity shop, sanded it down, and painted it her favorite sunshine yellow. It was usually covered in her imaginative drawings, well-loved storybooks, interesting leaves or smooth, gray stones she'd collected on our walks. Had she sat there, patches propped solemnly beside her, laboriously writing out her thoughts, her deepest feelings, in her careful, still rounded elementary school handwriting? The thought of her small, solitary act of immense courage made my throat tighten with an almost unbearable mixture of pride and tenderness. She hadn't been prompted by me, or by Ms. Albright, or by anyone else. This was all Lily. Her own quiet, dignified rebellion against the overwhelming adult narrative that was attempting to define and dictate her young life. Judge Davies finally lowered the letter, placing it carefully, almost reverently, on the polished expanse of the bench before her. She looked over the rims of her reading glasses at Mr. Henderson, whose usually ruddy face was now a mask of controlled, indignant fury. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice calm but undeniably firm, "I assume you will want to see this." He rose stiffly. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this is highly irregular. The child has not been called as a witness. We have no way of knowing what undue influence, what pressures." "Mr. Henderson," the judge interrupted, her tone sharpening perceptibly, "this is a letter from a child, handed to me directly in open court. I will allow you and Miss Peterson to read it. We will take a short recess." She then looked pointedly at Clara. "Miss Peterson, you may wish to accompany your counsel." Clara looked profoundly shaken, truly, visibly shaken for the very first time throughout this entire ordeal. The carefully constructed composure, her armor of maternal righteousness, was gone, replaced by a raw, almost bewildered anger, mingled with a dawning apprehension. She stood, her movements jerky and uncoordinated, and followed Mr. Henderson into an anteroom, her usually confident stride faltering. Miss Albright came over to my table, her eyes wide with astonishment. "I had absolutely no idea," she whispered, her voice full of awe. "Neither did I breathed, my gaze still fixed on Lily, who was now being gently guided back to her seat by a kind-faced court officer. She looked small and a little overwhelmed by the sudden attention, but as she passed me, she gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible, conspiratorial smile. A smile that spoke volumes, of trust, of a shared secret now courageously revealed. The recess felt like an eternity, each second stretching into a painful minute. I sat, numb, replaying every moment I'd ever shared with Lily, every quiet conversation, every shared laugh, every tear I dried, every scraped knee I'd kissed better. Had I done enough? Had I been enough? Clara's relentless accusations, so cleverly designed to dismantle my confidence, to paint me as incapable, unstable, even neglectful, swirled in my head like a poisonous fog. She was so infuriatingly good at it, twisting my deep, abiding love for Lily, my sometimes clumsy but always sincere efforts, into damning evidence of my supposed failings. Her central argument, repeated ad nauseum, was always that she offered a bigger, more impressive house in a more affluent neighborhood, greater financial stability, though much of it stemmed from her new, wealthy partner. A rather pertinent fact she consistently, conveniently glossed over, a more structured and disciplined life. What she failed to understand, or perhaps simply refused to acknowledge, was that what Lily truly needed, what every child truly needs, wasn't more things, but more connection, more understanding, more unconditional, unwavering love. The kind that didn't come with caveats, conditions, or exacting standards of perfection. The memory of our little apartment, the one Clara's lawyer had so contemptuously depicted as chaotic and unsuitable, surfaced again. Yes, it was small compared to Clara's new townhouse. Yes, sometimes there were toys on the floor and dishes in the sink because I was juggling demanding freelance work with school runs, meal preparation, and ensuring Lily had a nutritious home-cooked meal and clean clothes. But it was our space, our sanctuary. After Clara left, I'd let Lily help decorate her own room. We'd spent a joyful weekend painting a whimsical mural of a friendly forest, complete with smiling animals, on one entire wall. Her colorful drawings were blue-tacked proudly everywhere. It was a haven filled not with material wealth or designer furniture, but with genuine warmth, with countless stories read aloud in funny voices, with silly, uninhibited dances in the living room, with whispered bedtime confidences and dreams shared before sleep. These were the intangible, precious things that truly mattered, the things Clara couldn't quantify, or, it seemed, even see. The thought that Lily, in her own innocent, articulate way, had somehow managed to convey all of this, filled me with a profound, overwhelming sense of awe, and a deep, aching tenderness that brought tears to my eyes. My little girl, my brave, quiet, extraordinary Lily. A profound silence descended upon the courtroom, so complete it felt as if the world outside had ceased to exist. It wasn't just quiet, it was a void, a vacuum where sound dared not tread. Every eye was on Judge Davies, on the simple, folded piece of paper she held. My own breathing seemed to have stopped. Then, the silence was broken by a small, choked sob, sharp and ragged. It came from Clara. Her carefully composed face had crumpled, the mask entirely gone. It wasn't just defeat in her expression. It was a bewildering kaleidoscope of emotions, shock, yes, but also a flicker of something akin to dawning, painful comprehension. As if she were seeing the true landscape of her daughter's heart for the very first time, a landscape she had tried to remap with her own desires. Her perfectly manicured hands, which had rested so confidently on the table before her, were now clenched in her lap, white-knuckled. The confident tilt of her head was gone. She looked smaller, somehow less formidable. For a fleeting moment, a ghost of the woman I had once loved flickered in my vision, lost and uncertain, before the bitterness of the recent months resurfaced. Judge Davies placed the letter down with a reverence that seemed to acknowledge its immense weight. She looked at Clara, then at Mr. Henderson, whose face was a study in controlled dismay. His lips were pressed into a thin line, his earlier courtroom swagger completely deflated. He looked like a man who had meticulously built a house of cards, only to watch it collapse from an unexpected, gentle breeze. Mr. Henderson, Judge Davies said, her voice slicing through the residual tension, your client has consistently portrayed Mr. Peterson as neglectful, unstable, and incapable of providing a suitable home environment. She has emphasized her own superior financial position and the structured nature of her household, often implying that Mr. Peterson's more modest circumstances and perhaps less rigid lifestyle were detrimental. She paused, allowing her words to sink in, her gaze unwavering. This letter, this drawing, from an 8-year-old child, paints a very different picture. It speaks not of material provision, which, while not unimportant, is far from the entirety of a child's needs. It speaks of emotional connection, of safety, of being heard and valued. It speaks of a father who, despite what sound like significant challenges perhaps exacerbated by the very circumstances of this dispute, has consistently provided a loving and nurturing environment, the core of a true home. She looked directly at me, and her eyes, which I had once perceived as stern and judgmental, now held a measure of respect. Mr. Peterson, it is clear that your daughter feels a profound bond with you, a sense of security that seems to be paramount in her mind, a security she has bravely articulated. This court cannot, and will not, ignore such a clear expression of a child's well-being. My vision blurred with unshed tears. I could only manage a shaky nod, my throat too constricted for speech. The relief was so immense, so overwhelming, it felt like a physical force, pushing the air from my lungs. Mr. Henderson, visibly flustered, attempted a recovery, his voice lacking its usual confident timbre. Your Honor, a child's perception can be easily influenced. Perhaps, Mr. Peterson, it's not uncommon for children to express loyalty. Are you suggesting, Mr. Henderson? Judge Davies interrupted, her voice dangerously quiet, each word precise and cutting, that Mr. Peterson orchestrated this? That he coached his 8-year-old daughter, a child described by all, including her mother, as shy and reserved, to fabricate these sentiments and then to have the astonishing presence of mind to walk to my bench and present them unbidden? A daughter who, I might add, just displayed a quiet courage and clarity that many adults in this room, engaged in this adversarial process, might do well to emulate. Henderson visibly blanched, his face flushing. No, Your Honor. Of course not. That was not my implication. But children can be sentimental. Sentimental, Mr. Henderson? The judge countered, an eyebrow arched. Or perhaps, simply honest? The evidence presented by your client has focused heavily on perceived inadequacies in Mr. Peterson's lifestyle, his financial means, the tidiness of his apartment. What this letter provides, with remarkable lucidity, is insight into the child's emotional lived experience. That, Mr. Henderson, is the bedrock of this court's primary concern, the best interests and emotional well-being of the child. She looked from a now ashen-faced Clara to me, then back to the documents spread before her. The silence stretched again, but this time it was imbued with a sense of impending resolution, the oppressive weight I'd carried for so long finally, blessedly, beginning to lift. After careful consideration of all testimony and evidence submitted throughout these proceedings, Judge Davies finally said, her voice resonating with a calm, irrefutable authority, including this heartfelt and highly persuasive submission from Lily Peterson herself, I am amending the previous temporary custody order. Primary physical custody will be awarded to Mr. Peterson, effective immediately. She went on to detail visitation rights for Clara, her tone firm yet fair, emphasizing the critical need for cooperative co-parenting and stressing that both parents had a responsibility to foster and support Lily's relationship with the other. Each word was not just a legal directive. It was a validation, a quiet affirmation of the truth of my love for Lily, of the life we had built together in our small, imperfect way. Clara sat frozen, tears streaming unchecked down her face now. These were not the artful, persuasive tears of her earlier testimony, but the raw, painful tears of someone confronting an undeniable truth, perhaps even confronting aspects of herself she had long kept hidden. Her shoulders sagged. The fight had gone out of her, leaving behind a stark vulnerability. Mr. Henderson, for his part, was mechanically shuffling his papers, his expensive suit suddenly looking ill-fitting, his confident legal arguments rendered moot by a child's crayon drawing of a smiling sun and a few simple, devastatingly honest sentences. Ms. Albright beside me let out a long, shaky breath she seemed to have been holding for weeks and gently squeezed my arm, her eyes shining with a mixture of relief and triumph. It was over. The relentless storm that had threatened to tear my world apart, the battle that had consumed my every waking thought, eroded my spirit, and cast such a frightening shadow over Lily's innocent young world, was finally, blessedly over. We gathered our few belongings, my hands still trembling slightly. As we walked out of the courtroom, the heavy oak door thudding softly shut behind us, Lily was waiting just outside in the echoing hallway, standing beside the kind-faced court officer, patches once again tucked protectively under her arm. Her eyes, those dark, expressive pools that had watched everything with such solemn intensity, found mine. They were wide, a little anxious, searching for reassurance. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Words felt utterly inadequate, hollow things in the face of the profound emotion that swelled within me. I simply walked towards her and knelt, my knees hitting the cool, unforgiving marble floor of the corridor without a thought for the discomfort. She rushed into my arms, a small, warm missile of love, her small body fitting against mine as if she were a missing piece of my own soul, the part that made me whole. She didn't say anything either. She just hugged me, her arms wrapped fiercely around my neck, her face buried in my shoulder, her neatly plaited braids tickling my ear. I held her just as tightly, my eyes squeezed shut against the sudden sting of tears, breathing in the faint, sweet scent of her lavender shampoo, feeling the steady, reassuring rhythm of her small heart beating against my chest. It was a long, silent embrace, a communion of relief, gratitude, and a love so profound it needed no words, no explanations. In that moment, the sterile, imposing courthouse corridor, with its echoing footsteps and the distant, hushed voices of officialdom, simply faded into insignificance. There was only Lily, her unwavering, intuitive faith, her quiet, astonishing courage, and the unbreakable bond that tethered us together. I felt the tension of months, of years even, begin to drain out of me, replaced by a peace so profound it was almost dizzying. After what felt like a lifetime, a beautiful, timeless eternity, she pulled back slightly, her dark eyes, luminous and clear, shining up at me. A small, shy, yet incredibly radiant smile touched her lips. "I told you Patches liked your house best, Daddy," she whispered, her voice soft as a sigh. A watery chuckle escaped me, a sound shaky with unspeakable relief. "You did, sweet pea," I managed, my own voice thick with emotion. "You really, really did." I rose to my feet, still feeling a little unsteady, and took her small, trusting hand in mine. Ms. Albright was there, her smile genuine and warm, conveying everything words could not. Even the court officer, a man whose face had been a mask of professional neutrality throughout the proceedings, offered a small, almost imperceptible nod and a softening around his eyes that looked suspiciously like approval. As we walked towards the grand main exit, away from the room that had been the arena for so much fear and uncertainty, I glanced back one last time. The heavy door to courtroom 4 was closing, a final, definitive sound. The courtroom was quiet, but this time, I felt known. Known not through the distorting prism of accusation and legal maneuvering, but through the clear, unwavering, loving eyes of my child. And that, I realized with a clarity that was like a fresh dawn, was the only judgment that had ever truly mattered. Our steps were light, almost buoyant, as we walked out of the shadows of the courthouse and into the bright, welcoming afternoon sun, towards our small, happy home with its beloved crooked chimney, Lily's hand held firmly, safely, and triumphantly in mine.